The demo I'm going to do is fun and will help you understand the important relationships that exist between water, paint, and paper, and how to obtain value and color changes within the shapes that make up your composition. I'd like to illustrate for you what I mean when I say paint shapes, not things. The next time you're out in the landscape and you see an evergreen tree that might be a pine tree of sorts, turn it into a simple triangular shape. Once you have those shapes on your paper and you've created a composition, you can begin filling in those shapes with beautiful color, texture, contrast, and value. You don't have to be a great artist to be able to draw simple shapes. It will really make painting easier. We're going to use my favorite brushes. I usually use just one to complete a whole painting, even though this is very large and we're going to be doing a very small symbol here. We're going to use this large brush. It's a Princeton Synthetic Sable brush, number 4050R series, a number 16. And here's my little liner brush from that same collection. So I'd like to show you the palette knife that I use. It's one of my favorite tools. Mostly oil painters use these, but I love to use them to create texture and marks in my work. It gives me a look that I can't get with any other tool. I'd like for you to think of this small painting as an exercise, something that's great for practice. I also want to illustrate here how it's so much easier to paint shapes in the landscape than trying to paint things with a lot of detail to figure out. First, we're going to do a little value scale with the colors that we're going to use. I'm going to do something fairly light here with the mother color, which I have already pre-mixed. It's a good idea to have these colors ready so that you don't spend time mixing while your paint is drying. So pretty light value, I'll test that, and that's about what I want, because I want these colors to be able to not be grayed down too much by this mother green. So we'll go ahead and place that color with as few strokes as possible with this large number 16 brush. Get a little more paint if you need it. And I don't know if the camera shows it, but this is very wet, and that's how it needs to be when you're dropping color into it. So we're going to use these four colors. We're going to use Quin Gold, and I want that Quin Gold to be thick enough, heavy enough with pigment so that it will stay and not completely fill the area that I'm painting it into. So we'll get some of the Quin Gold that I've mixed up here, and maybe I'll put a little more pigment in, and we'll try to get a fairly dark value. And then this will be here for you to look at as you do your exercise. Now we're going to put in some permanent rose. Put that in with one stroke. The fewer, whoops, I'll have to do two strokes, but the fewer strokes you have, the better you're going to be as far as not disturbing your pigment once you lay it down. And we will now put in some manganese blue. So here we go. I'm going to darken that up just a little bit more. That's a little better. I want it to be darker than that mother color. So these are all darker so far, and that's what I'm after. And I'll look at this as I paint to try to keep in that range. Now we're going to use some cobalt blue. And these are the only colors that we're going to use in this exercise. The fewer the colors, sometimes the more colorful your work will be. Now we're ready to begin painting this big shape. I want to be sure and give some interest now to the edges. I have the general shape in mind, so now all I need to do is do some interesting brush strokes along these edges. And we'll go ahead with the mother green. I'm going to make sure I don't get this too dark, so I'll be adding a little water. There we go, that's about right. Now, here we go. We're going to fill this whole shape with just few strokes as possible. try not to overstroke this area. Just keep moving along. I'm going to quickly be picking up the first color that I'm going to be laying in, and I'll let these colors mix on their own right here on the paper. Now I need to hurry along before that dries. We're going to start with Quin Gold, and you can see I'm thickening that up a little bit because I want to get pretty dark here. If it's too thin, it will spread and we'll lose the intensity. So now we have that beautiful Quin Gold. Let's put a little bit right here at the top. You just can pat that on there. You don't have to really brush it much. It will move on its own. Now we're going to pick up this permanent rose. And with the side of your brush, sometimes it's better to use the side of your brush because you can cover more area. And let it run down into those shapes. Put a little bit here. I want large, medium, and small shapes following the principles of design. And maybe some there. Now let's put in some manganese blue. And we'll let some of this mother green shine through. I don't want to completely cover it all. And now a little bit of cobalt blue. I'm using a lot of color here just to show you how you can step outside the box and how you can mix these colors to get all of these great combinations. What we need to do now is give this time to dry just a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and show you how I'll use the palette knife. So once this has dried just enough that it's lost its glisten, its sheen, you can begin using this palette knife to make embellishments and mark making, strokes, chunks, lines. It's so interesting, and I can't get this effect with any other tool but this so far. So I'm going to show you how I use it. There's a learning curve. You just have to practice with it until it feels comfortable in your hand. I'm going to use the side of this palette knife to create what might look like part of a tree trunk. We will do some branches coming down and coming down. It's a very fun tool to use, but you do have to get comfortable with it so that it doesn't feel contrived and your strokes don't look contrived. Now we're going to make some marks that might make you think of pine needles. It's just decoration. And you want small marks, long marks, short marks, variety, repetition with variety. You see the negative spaces are left that are different. That's important, otherwise you get boring passages. Repetition with variety. It's all part of the principles and elements of design. Put that at the top of your list of things to study if you haven't already. Now, so let's look and see if we have gotten these values fairly close. And I think we have. And we still have this light value here, which will be good. Now we're going to use the same technique to fill this little triangle here. I'm going to use Mother Green again as the base. Very light. This little shape is further back in the landscape, so it has to be lighter and it has to be cooler if I want to create that illusion of depth. So how do we do that? We just cool it down with cool color. The perfect color would be this manganese blue. Let's make it predominantly cool back here and light. And we want to go ahead and share some of the other color we use with this little shape so that it belongs to the same family. So here is a little bit of cobalt blue, just a touch. Let's do that a little bit more pigment. Yes, there you go. And now let's give some of that sunny Quinn gold a place on this shape. Now that will blend, and we will come back when it's dry enough, and we'll put a little bit of the same pattern in that little shape. Can you see the difference in value between these two? This is further away. It's lighter. It's predominantly cool. This one's closer. It's predominantly warm and darker in value. Now we're going to share this type of texture in this background shape, but not very much because the eye wouldn't be able to see and detect much. It's too far away. But we'll just repeat that pattern a little bit. Now we're going to let this completely dry so that we can start adding real contrast. I use this liner brush for mark making. I sometimes call it calligraphy, as in art. It takes a little practice to learn to use it casually and artfully. I'm going to demonstrate that right here for you. You don't want to make straight lines that are so boring. You want the lines to be interesting. So let's try that. I mixed up Prussian blue, my darkest pigment, with a little bit of my next dark pigment, which is alizarin crimson. And it gave me a really nice warm black that will be in keeping with the warmth of this painting. So first of all, let's just practice with it on these squares. And watch how I make a line. A line, for some people, they say it's a straight line. My lines are never straight. They're always as artistic as I can possibly make them, so that they're fun to look at. And I start and stop so the eye can rest and then go on. Artistic line work. This is all part of mark making, and it adds another dimension to your work. So you can practice like this in your own time using this liner brush. But don't make boring straight lines with it. And make sure that they're thick and thin, fat and skinny, just like your principles and elements of design will advise you to use that concept. Broken color, lost and found edges, all the things you've read about need to be put into practice when you're creating a work of art. Great practice. Now let's make a line, an artistic, artful line. I'm going to get a little more paint, and maybe I'll just put some dots of strokes right there. That's an artistic line. Of course, I've exaggerated it a little bit just for the illustration of it, but we'll use that here. Now I'm going to start at the top so I don't come back into my wet paint, and I'm going to use the same idea to decorate or embellish. But mainly I like to do this, not only is it entertaining, but it adds that final dark contrast which will bring life to the shape that you're working on. So here we go. and you want to do this quickly. Don't go back and fiddle with it once you've put it down. Just make a decision and go. And I'm trying to use repetition with variety so that it's fun and interesting to look at. Can you already begin to see how this value is making these colors more jewel-like? The contrast is so important in your work. Value is so important in your work. I'm going to now come on around the bottom here and over here, a few little marks. Let's put some marks here. And we'll do a little bit inside now. Mark making, so much fun. You have to be careful when you first start because you can easily overdo this. So far I'm kind of liking what's happening here. I love the contrast. Put some inside. Now let's go ahead and say that's probably enough. Let's put a little bit on this shape back here so it belongs to the shape in front of it. And you see how this shape overlaps? That's one of the ways you create depth on a flat sheet of paper. You can learn more about these concepts through my videos on my website and my books. I talk about all of this in more depth. But you see, I'm putting less information on this one because it is further away from the eye, and this is really the most important shape. But I want the two shapes to belong. And we'll put some little line work here and maybe make you believe that that is a trunk. And we'll repeat that line work there. And now we're going to do this right down here at the base. And you'll see that we have different size brush strokes. Fat ones, medium ones, small ones. That all comes naturally once you understand repetition with variety and start using it in all of your paintings. Yeah. So now we'll let that dry. That's one thing about the black. It doesn't bleed well. It can make a muddy passage, so you want to always make sure that you're completely dry before you start adding any more color to it. There's another technique that I would like to share with you before we're finished with this demonstration, and it's called glazing. Many of you may already be familiar with glazing. I love using this technique, and I use it in every painting that I create. It's a way to add temperature, increase value. So this is glazing. Number one tip is that it has to be done on a completely bone dry piece of paper. It cannot be wet. It has to be dry so that the color I'm getting ready to apply will float and sit on top of the layer beneath it. So we're going to intensify this look of red here. It's permanent rose. I just want to give it a little more oomph. You can go ahead and take a clean, wet brush with clear water, and you can wet some of these areas and see how gently I'm touching. I don't want to disturb the layer that I'm getting ready to glaze into. I don't want to paint over these white scrape marks, so I'm being very careful. I want those to stay as light as possible for contrast. And we'll put a little bit here. Now, I'm going to pick up Permanent Rose, and I'm going to lay that in really gently as a glaze. Okay, so now I think you'll be able to visually see. You see how I just sort of drop that in? I don't really spread it because it's going to spread on its own because of the water that I applied. Very careful. I want it to move into the water that I put there and just give a little more power to this color. Okay, I think that's very nice. And so now I can take my brush and clean all of the paint out of it and just sort of soak the water out of it onto a dry cloth so that you don't have water, a lot of water. And I want to just soften up some of these edges so there's a gentle transition that will remain with these colors. Can you see how much brighter? So I adjust my work, all of my paintings in the end, by glazing in warmer or cooler passages, brighter passages. Now let's do the same with the cobalt blue. Let's put a little water here. Clear water, and now we'll pick up some of this cobalt blue and we'll intensify that blue color. See, I'm just touching that and the water, the pigment is pulled right out of my brush. I think it's quite pretty when that happens. Now we will rinse the color out of our brush and we'll soften up these edges so there's an easier transition. Real lightly, I don't want to disturb the paint layer that's below this, so I'm very careful. And so you can see the brightness there. Now how about if we brighten up that manganese blue a little bit? We'll do the same thing. We will add some water. And then we will pick up this manganese blue and add a little bit of that. And I'll get all of the paint out of my brush and dry it a little bit so it's only damp, and then we'll smooth this transition so there's not like a blob. Real easy. An easy touch so that you don't disturb the color that's beneath it. Now let's add a little bit over here in this small shape so it will belong. We don't want to get the value raised too high or it will come forward, and I want that to stay back, but I'd like to share a little bit of the intensity that the front shape has. So I'm going to put some water here, and then I'm going to dry my brush a little bit, make it damp, and we'll just put some of this beautiful. I do this to all of my works to get that extra energy going. Now we're going to smooth out these edges. I think we could add a little bit of this Quin Gold right here. Repeat that a little bit, so I'll wet it. And then I will get some of this Quin Gold And we will drop a little bit into that moisture there to pick that color up. And we're going to soften the edges a little bit. Real easy. And I'm looking at that and I think, okay, those two shapes really belong together. Now these are so much fun. These are little exercises that you can do. Do them over and over again until you're familiar and really comfortable with doing the techniques, and do it until it becomes intuitive and you don't have to think about it as you're creating your larger pieces. I hope you have found useful information in this video. I know I have enjoyed sharing it with you. In closing, I would like to express my sincere gratitude once again to Marcello, owner of the Da Vinci Paint Company, for making this awesome little Mother Green palette possible. Most importantly, I want you to know my heartfelt appreciation goes out to each of you for your interest and support of my work. I know for sure that none of my many artful blessings would be so without you.